Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode, we were joined by Ganesh Swami, the CEO and co-founder of Covalent. In today's conversation, we discussed how decentralization can positively impact the AI economy using blockchain networks to purvey truth, how monolithic versus modular infrastructure approaches, how the Ethereum Wayback Machine will store all of Ethereum's history, reasons for hope, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens. The guest or host may hold tokens discussed in any given episode, and you can check out a full disclaimer on www.neonewstoday.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on your favorite podcasting platform and share it with your friends and family. Every rating, review, like, and comment really helps us get in front of more eyes and ears and brings you more of your favorite guests. With all that said, I really enjoyed speaking with Ganesh, and I hope you enjoy the conversation too. Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast. Today we're joined by Ganesh Swami, the CEO and co-founder of Covalent, what started as a data analytics company but is becoming an infrastructure services provider. And I really can't wait to dig into all of that. But how are you doing today, Ganesh?
I'm doing fantastic, Dylan. Super happy to be here and share some of the perspectives that we're seeing in the crypto world and the broader economy. Let's get started.
Yeah, so I hope you don't mind. I kind of want to jump into this with like a bigger kind of question, and this kind of ties into what we were talking about before we hit the record button. You guys are starting to build for AI infrastructure. You're starting to build light clients for Ethereum, and so you're kind of seeing where the puck is going in terms of how this technology and the world that we operate in is kind of innovative and cutting edge, but will become mainstream. So in a world where AI becomes more and more prevalent, why is it so important that today we start building decentralized infrastructure to help support this emerging technology?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. So I think fundamentally, what we are all striving to build is a way that, compute and opportunities are equitable and accessible to all. And so in the AI realm, there's really, three facets of how decentralization can help the AI economy. The first is being the decentralized training aspect, which is where these models are built, right? So it's the training phase. It's where you go to school and you spend the first couple of years just learning about the world. And there are lots of great companies doing training, both in the centralized and the decentralized fashion. These models are, especially these foundation models, are very expensive to build, like $100 million plus. And thankfully, because of the work of Meta and some other providers out there, they've built these open source models, unlike the ones from OpenAI. So decentralized training is one facet. Decentralized inference is where everything that you've accumulated in school, all the knowledge that you've accumulated in school is put to use. It's put to use and put to test in the real world. So that's where the decentralized or the centralized inference can come in. And you can see where the capital expenditure is in the world today. I would say it's about 50-50, 50% towards training, 50% towards inference. But how I think and how a lot of people, including how NVIDIA thinks about this world, is that training is only going to be maybe 5% of the spend. 95% of that is going to be inference, because you only go to school for a fraction of your life, and then the rest is applying and learning new skills and so on. So inference is where we're going to see maybe 1,000x, maybe 10,000x in the growth in the crypto economy. And so that is the second facet. The third facet, which is an overlooked facet, is the data aspect. The underpinning for all of this, the training of the models, the inference, enriching, fine-tuning these models with external data, comes from the data facet. And this is a problem that we're looking to solve. So I think in the world of models, for example, you have closed source models and open source models. And it's really important to have open source models so that it's accessible to everyone. You can just run on your computer and so on. And not everyone needs the O1 strawberry kind of model, right? Why do you need a truck to go grocery shopping? Some people do it, but that's overkill, right? You sometimes just need a smaller model that you can run on your phone. the data aspect is overlooked because what I think will happen in the world is that because these AI agents and AI processes are so prevalent and so integrated into our world, it's really hard to know what's real and what's not real. And at some point, society, people in the world will start to ask, how did this model come to be? Where is this data coming from? And just like how you have champagne versus sparkling wine, you're going to have decentralized data that is used to train the model and just closed source data that is used to train the model. I'm not saying biases are wrong. People have opinions, and it's good to have a difference of opinion. You could have, diversity in opinion, diversity in thought. I mean, that's the fundamental, First Amendment. But the key issue is that these biases have to be disclosed. And this is where blockchains and crypto systems really come into place, because you have the full provenance of the base data and all of the transformations that have happened to that data that is then fed into these models to train them, and then further downstream in terms of inference. So the decentralized data aspect is specifically what we are focused on, along with all of the other aspects down the pipe. But we're not really focused on the decentralized trading aspect today. There's lots of great projects out there doing that today.
What a killer way to kind of paint the picture for what AI is, the three kind of verticals within that sphere, and how crypto and blockchain really fits into that. I think as an industry, especially as crypto and blockchain folks, a lot of people aren't quite asking yet, how is AI going to integrate with blockchain and crypto? And because not a lot of us are asking yet, we really haven't gotten to have these thought experiments and kind of run down the path that you did. So I really appreciate that. And I guess to kind of follow up on that, and maybe to get a little bit of your background, what was kind of your genesis story with crypto and blockchain? What was the first time you heard about it? And maybe if you're like me, you didn't have an aha moment until a few years later, or maybe when you did hear about crypto the first time, you had your aha moment. What was that?
Yeah, so it's more of the former. My introduction to crypto was quite accidental. So my background is actually as a physicist. I used to work on cancer drugs, and I did that about half my career. The problem with pharmaceuticals is that it takes a while to get products out to the market. So this company that I was on the founding team, 10 years in, we have an MVP out because of the FDA approval process and so on. It just takes a while. And my peers in technology were starting companies and going to market and doing M&A transactions in 18 months. And so I was kind of missing that fast pace. And so I pivoted out of pharmaceuticals into just data infrastructure in the Web2 world. So a lot of data warehousing, data pipelining, and so on. Did that for a while. And a friend of mine recommended that I go check out this database hackathon that was hosted by a blockchain company. And I'd mostly looked at blockchains as a joke, because I was used to 50,000 transactions per second. And Ethereum at that point was less than 20 transactions per second. And like, okay, well, this is a joke, this is a toy. It's not really that useful and not that practical. But it rains a lot in Vancouver, which is where I'm from. And so this, lazy Saturday, just went out to this hackathon, built this really cool kind of technology just to scratch my own itch, which is getting blockchain transactions into Excel. So you don't have to run these nodes, you don't have to understand blockchains, or you don't have to do any of that stuff. And just from the data world, I know that Excel is basically every analyst it has it in their tool set. And most people would probably pick Excel over their spouses, right? That's how important Excel is in the world. And so just building this toolkit where you can build blockchain transactions, see blockchain transactions, and pivot in Excel is a very useful tool. So I just built it to scratch my own itch, ended up winning that hackathon, and then deciding to start a company, a commercial operation to take this product to market and build that out. So that's the genesis story. Thankfully, that weekend, it rained in Vancouver and there was this hackathon. I think that company that even hosted the hackathon is not around anymore, but that was the genesis story. And then I built it because it was cool. Technology is cool. I'm a technologist. I'm very optimistic about the future. I love this kind of stuff. And I built it for that reason. And it was only years after, with all of the changes that were coming out, as I started to pay more attention to politics, to what's happening in society, that's when I realized that, this can truly solve a genuine problem that we face as society, which is, how do you get to the ground truth? How do you believe what someone is telling you? How do you keep people accountable for the claims and the promises that they've made? And I think that is where that was my aha moment. And I've never shied away from this, but it's taken me maybe like 3-4 years of working full time in crypto before I understood, okay, this is the unlock. And for better or worse, I don't come from an economy where there's hyperinflation and I need Bitcoin. And I haven't gone through those experiences. We live in a very safe, stable society. So I think we live a luxurious life in some ways. So those aspects don't really talk to me, but just the data and the provenance of claims and the truth is what speaks to me. And that is why I continue to build in the crypto space today.
So what are some of the similarities and differences in the needs of data and data service providers that you saw from 2017 through today? In what ways is blockchain still doing what it was supposed to do? And in what ways are there kind of new needs that have arisen in the years since you've been in the space?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So I go back to this interview that Jeff Bezos did. Jeff Bezos is the founder and was the CEO of Amazon. And he said, entrepreneurs should focus on things that do not change rather than things that change. And so don't focus on the new and the shiny and the novelty, right? Use that for some sizzle, but focus on things that never change. So in the Amazon example, people want faster, better, cheaper deliveries. In the case of data, people want faster, better, cheaper data. That's all, point blank, right? And whether it's an L1 or L2 or a rollup or a ZK technology or optimism technology, doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, is your data fast? Is your data cheap? Can I trust your data? And is it like available to me? That's it. That's basically it. So, day after day, for many, many years now, all we've been doing is focusing on this core loop of just better, faster, cheaper data. And so over the years, we've had multiple technology waves come by. When we started, there was no DeFi, there's no NFT, there's no GameFi, there's no SocialFi. It was all L1 data. In fact, when we started, ERC20s were just coming out. So there were no tokens either. There were no stable coins. And all of that has happened just in the last couple of years, right? So we've come a long way as an industry, as a technology. But comes back to that, better, faster, cheaper data. And so the diversity of applications on the blockchain have also increased. Right back in the ICO era, it was mostly funding these ICO projects using ETH. So ETH was your payment currency. And then you would get this ERC20 token. And so I would say maybe 99% of those ERC20 tokens from back then don't exist today or are basically dead. But it battle tested this technology of doing ERC20 transfers and ERC20 approvals and so on, which is how it led to the next wave of innovation with stable coins and then NFTs and then using GameFi with these faster blockchains, and then just keeps evolving at a faster and faster pace. So the crux is people need data because the whole promise of blockchains is it's an immutable ledger. Once you put data in there, it cannot be mutated, and it becomes stronger and stronger. The guarantees become stronger and stronger as the blockchain propagates. But our belief is that the whole promise of blockchains would be unfulfilled if you cannot read from the blockchain. And so everyone out there, if you look at Solana, look at all the optimistic rollups, all the ZK rollups, they dump their chests and say, we can hit these transactions per second and so on, right? It's how fast can you write to the blockchain? But nobody out there, except a few players like Covalent, are actually saying this is how fast you can read from the blockchain. Forget write to the blockchain, because I think write to the blockchain, there's dozens of teams working on that. But reading from a blockchain, can you read all of the historical data? I mean, there's a whole facet of these data center chains, that's happening with Ethereum and chains just to reach a faster throughput. Some of the core values are being lost. But can you read the data from the blockchain? Because you claim to have put it on the blockchain, you claim to have this immutable ledger, but how do I know it's actually on there? Can I get it back? And if the answer is no, then what's the point of putting it in a blockchain in the first place, right? So that's essentially, where kind of the problems we're trying to solve has shifted and has evolved over the years. But it comes back to the same thing: better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah, and maybe this question, I'm not sure if I'm going to formulate it accurately or adequately, but you've mentioned multiple times in our discussion so far, trust, that this technology can be used to embed trust. And being able to read data is being able to trust its source. But with all these advent of new verticals such as DeFi, NFTs, decentralized identity, all this stuff that is putting data on chain, how does the scope and scale of trust change? In one way, we can trust everything we see on chain because it's an open source, immutable network. But how can we leverage this for ways in which we don't even comprehend right now? One of the things as a content creator I'm consistently worried about is we're going to get to a future soon where AI is writing articles, where maybe somebody is using some sort of AI service and scraping all the podcasts I've ever hosted and is using my voice to create new episodes for whatever purpose they want. So how will we be able to kind of like start using these systems to trust that an individual that I do indeed trust, I would assume that people listening to this trust me as a host. How can we start leveraging these systems to kind of embed trust into what we consume? And maybe what are some other ways in which you and your team are thinking about how trust is going to become more and more important as this technology becomes more prevalent in day-to-day society?
Yeah, so fantastic set of questions. So in the way I think about this is trust is a layered approach. And so you have the base data, which is your blocks and your transactions, and there should be no confusion on what is real and what is not real, right? It's backed by cryptography. It's backed by mathematics. It's not the trust me bro semantics that we see in society, right? So that there should be no confusion on what is real, what the ground truth is. A layer above that is whether this is a trade, which is a sell or a buy or a transfer. That's where people's opinions come in. And at that point, it gets a little fuzzy in terms of what is real and what is not real. And I don't think there's an issue with that, right? People have difference of opinions, and that's actually what makes society very unique, especially Western society. So that's where the provenance aspect comes in. So let's take a look at what do we mean by provenance? Provenance is just the entire paper trail of every change that is made. And because of cryptography and because of blockchains, what you can do is you can build on three facets of the provenance, which is who did this, what did it do, and when was this done? It's not talking about the veracity or the accuracy of the data. It may be fake news, it doesn't matter, but you know who did it and you know when it was done and what was done. And so you have this paper trail of signatures or proofs that these actions were done. So if there's any point in time, if you were to trace back and figure out where did this come from, that's where the data provenance chain, the trail, makes a difference. So now if you think about intellectual property, if you think about creator rights, if you think about royalties, if you think about all of these things, even in the AI models, right? If you look at OpenAI, they scrape all of this information and they use it and they commercialize this. And what would be a fair economy is where all of the people who've contributed their content for this model are compensated for the queries. Now, without a blockchain system, you cannot really do the accounting on who contributed this data to that model, because the answer from the inference engine, from the AI engine, is not just it's Dylan's podcast, right? It's a mishmash of multiple content sources. And so you would only get a fraction of the commercial value of that query, but that's still better than nothing. And so you're still, being compensated for what is rightfully your intellectual property. So these are some of the things that I think blockchains can really, really fix. And I'm really excited. I think, these are genuine problems. If you see, month after month after month, you see OpenAI. I think this is a few months ago where I think it's Scarlett Johansson's voice that they cloned and didn't ask her permission, or they asked her permission, she turned it down, and then they still did it. So something is off there, right? When a company, for-profit company, I guess back then nonprofit, now for-profit company, is able to pull a fast one. And so this is, they were able to do this with Johansson. What about the average everyday content creator on YouTube? So I think, these things will have to change. I think this is going back to the value of these, the spirit of the law behind intellectual property. So I think these things will change. It's just a matter of things catching up.
Yeah. So just like with everything, there's with the coin, there's a heads and there's a tails. There's an equal and opposite. So just as you mentioned, Scarlett Johansson's voice being taken without a permission, this is one way in which we could be afraid of how AI technology could be leveraged. Grimes also did. She released her voice and open sourced it, and she actually asked her fans to use her AI generated voice to create music. And one of her fans created a song so good that Grimes wanted to do a collaboration with her. So while we have these areas to kind of be concerned and worry about, there are also these beautiful areas that are artistic that can create something out of nothing that we hadn't even thought of before. And I kind of want to use this to segue into a topic that has a pro and a con side. From a retail token holder's perspective, because I'm not a developer, so my interaction with blockchain networks is typically through dApps and tokens and through holding and through using these networks to sign and send transactions. One of the arguments that I recently heard I've actually been hearing this across the space, but reared its head at permissionless, which is where I was last week, was this modular versus monolithic sort of thesis. And so using my experience and my context, we'll just use Ethereum, for instance. The ETH L1, a lot of folks are maybe even, and this isn't supposed to even be an economic discussion or token financial advice or anything like that, but when you talk about modularity versus monolithic chains, a lot of people are upset right now because the ETH token isn't necessarily accruing value the way that maybe like Solana is, because we do have this advent of multiple L2s that are taking network activity away from Ethereum and have their own tokens in their own ecosystems. And maybe one could argue that monolithic infrastructures are kind of the topic of the day, or the tokens that are hot, as we can see with Solana. So that's my kind of painted context of modularity and monolithic sort of infrastructure. It's through the token experience and witnessing what's happening on chain. What about with data? How does modular data infrastructure kind of offer a pro and a con versus a monolithic sort of infrastructure?
Yeah. So let's think about what these words actually mean, right? So in a monolithic architecture like Ethereum, what happens is that there's vertical integration across all of the facets of the blockchain. This could be the settlement layer, this could be the execution environment, this could be the data availability layer, and so on. So what that means is that if you need to evolve or innovate on a specific layer, you have all of this, for lack of a better word, baggage around you. And it just moves a lot slower because you have all of these interdependencies and so on. With a modular architecture, what ends up happening is that you can swap out components, you can hot swap and really pick the best in class components for your use case. So what is happening now is, despite Ethereum being called a monolithic architecture, you now have an opportunity to use different execution environments. You have an opportunity to use alt DAs like Celestia. You have these options available to you. So I would say in many ways, Ethereum is capturing the best of all worlds, where the base layer is something that's monolithic, that moves slow, that's the settlement layer. It's pretty robust. You're never going to get rug pulled. It's not the place for experiments. And all of the experimentation happens outside the L1 with all at the edges, at all the L2s. So that is another key aspect about how the architecture is evolving. Now, with regards to the price of ETH and so on, I actually just wrote an op-ed on CoinDesk last week talking about this specifically. And I think Ethereum came up with this roll-up architecture where intentionally they outsourced the innovation to the roll-ups, to the edges, so that they can move at a faster pace. And there's not a lot of legacy code or not a lot of baggage they have to carry forward. And then that's essentially what they did. And now what has happened is that the claim is that all of the rollups capture all of the fees, and ETH has not had a chance to appreciate in value. But if you take a step back, you're not going to be beholden to ETH holders. ETH holders are important, but it's a piece of technology that is building the world computer. So they're sticking to the Ethereum roadmap and doubling down on the L2 and improving this is the right path forward. And some of the members in the community continue to stick to that initial vision of the roadmap, while some others, because their bags are hurting, are saying that you got to almost like a parasitic relationship with the L2s, when it's more of a symbiotic relationship with the L2s because they're all part of the Ethereum ecosystem. And the only way to survive is not to capture all the gains yourself, but to let 1,000 flowers bloom. And so I'm in that camp where the Ethereum roadmap is the right answer, and all of these rollups will succeed. And with the data aspect is exactly the same, right? So every rollup has a completely different data environment, right? Sometimes it's not even EVM. EVM is the Ethereum virtual machine. So that's what Ethereum uses. That's what all the chains like Optimism and Base and Polygon and Arbitrum and ZK Sync, they all use a variant of the EVM. But there are other VMs like the Move VM. Movement Labs is coming up with this new execution environment. There are chains like Eclipse that's building an L2 with the SVM, which is a Solana VM. So you can run Solana programs secured by the Ethereum L1. And I think the world is like super diverse. You're never going to have one size fits all. And so that's fantastic. And so the only way for a data provider like Covalent to evolve with this architecture is to have a modular architecture, because a monolithic architecture was meant when at a time when there was only one blockchain, that was Ethereum, which is the case in 2018. We only added our second blockchain support in 2020, right? Before that, none of the other blockchains were really live or didn't matter at all. And today, Covalent supports 200 plus blockchains. And part of the reason for scaling to that speed is because of our modular and rebuilding, reconfiguring, re-architecturing the core engine behind this data product.
I love that. And so it seems like with the advent of all these different networks and chains, there's just these kind of gaps that Covalent can really fill. So maybe you could use this as an opportunity to kind of describe a little bit more in detail what Covalent does. And I'm also really interested to hear about how not only Covalent fills the gaps between all these different architectures and blockchain networks that exist, but how are you also bridging the gap between Web 2 and Web 3?
Great question. So maybe let me start with the Web2, Web3 aspect. The word covalent comes from covalent bonds for your listeners who've taken high school chemistry. So covalent bonds is a kind of chemical bond. And so here the analogy is we're binding Web2 and Web3 or databases and blockchains, centralized systems and decentralized systems. So that's really where the analogy comes in. And so databases as an industry has been around for like 40, 50 years. It's hundreds of billions of dollars. I think just one company alone, Oracle, is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And so this is a pretty mature kind of industry. And when databases were first introduced into the ecosystem, nobody really cared about why you need a database or why you need SQL as a language and so on. But databases are here to stay, right? They're not going anywhere. It's fully mature. It's a system of record for a lot of these systems out there. So it doesn't matter if you use a CRM or like any kind of like even the software where we are recording this podcast has a database at the back end. So every application is backed by a database. In the Web3 world, it's exactly the same thing. You have an application, a dApp, that is backed by a blockchain. But if you want to interact with the rest of the ecosystem, you want to have this kind of lens into treating this blockchain like a database. So that is exactly what Covalent does. So the blockchain continues to propagate, continues to get transactions, continues to secure users, assets, and data. And then on the flip side, it looks like a database. So you can run all of your standard database queries against the Covalent infrastructure. So that's essentially, it's this two-headed monster that can serve both purposes. And on top of that modular database that has all of the transaction data, what we've built is we've built a couple of products. So our first product is the Gold Rush product, which is a developer's API. And so if you look at any kind of standard dApp, or maybe let's take a specific example, like a wallet use case, for example. What you would have is the first view is a list of your tokens. The second view is a list of like NFTs that you have. The third view is a list of your historical transactions. So let's take these three specific views. So this is a common use case across most dApps. So list of your tokens, all of your ERC20 tokens, what is the spot address, spot price, what is your total value, what's the logo. So these it just gets you that information. List of NFTs, you want to know what is the floor price, what is the collection name. You want to see a thumbnail. You want to see maybe the sales history. You want to see what is the volume that has been traded. You want to be able to sort that by, how many holders and so on. And the third view is a list of transactions, which is just your transaction history. So it's one-to-one mirrored with your bank account. Let's say you have a US bank account. You go in, you have multiple accounts. You have a checkings account. You have a savings account. Maybe you have some kind of like registered account. Maybe you have different currencies. Maybe a US dollars. Maybe you have Canadian dollars. Maybe you have euros. And everything is cataloged. You see the outstanding balance. You tap into one of those accounts. You see all the transactions, the credit and debit. That's exactly what the Gold Rush API does. And we have hundreds of apps out there that rely on this data through this API that looks exactly like a Web2 API. So it's not very different from integrating with a Stripe or any Web2 service. In fact, you even pay using credit card. So that's really how that product goes to market. So you don't have to learn the differences between Solana and Polygon and Arbitrum and Base and ETH L1, it doesn't matter. So all it does is it shows you all of that key information, and then you can go build your application on top. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's one example of an application that we've built on top of this infrastructure. There are other use cases. We built a block explorer example. We built an analytics tool example, and so on. So that's really how the entire ecosystem lives. So on the modular stack itself, it's a decentralized protocol. So you have about 30 different operators who are running this data pipeline. So it's not Covalent, the commercial company that's running this data pipeline. So data is secured through cryptography and mathematics on how the Covalent database is built. And then that Covalent database is then monetized through the various products like Gold Rush. And so this monetization loop is basically what goes back through token buybacks, and that the whole economy flows that way. So that's basically how the system works.
Love it. When you were just describing Gold Rush, as an American, when it comes to tax time, it is such a pain to get this data, to scrape it, to put it into a form that I can send to the IRS. So I was envisioning how there could be a tool built using this API that would benefit me. As I'm thinking about this and my very real world problem, I got to thinking, like, who are some of your clients and customers that are using Gold Rush? You can't necessarily be only servicing, Web3 natives when you're providing these services and making them interoperate between DeFi and TradFi sort of providers. So are you seeing like traditional entities, traditional brick and mortar companies, mom and pop type stores? Are you seeing kind of like non-Web3 natives using Gold Rush? Who are kind of like some examples of your clients?
Yeah, so I think depending on the cycle, it comes and goes in terms of the Web2 adoption. And I think we're on an upswing right now. So we're seeing more Web2 adoption than maybe the last 2 years. So most of our bread and butter are Web3 crypto native companies. So you talk about the taxation use case. My understanding is that we are the biggest data provider to pretty much every tax company out there. So if you're a UX taxpayer and you go through Ernst & Young, EY data is Covalent. If you go, if you're a retail and you retail like participant and you go to token tax, that's Covalent data. If you want to do accounting, ERP kind of stuff like, integral, student request and so on, all of that is like Covalent data. So there's hundreds of use cases, right? It's just a can of tomato sauce and some pasta. It's up to you whether you want to make lasagna or something else, right? So we just give you the raw materials there. So on the Web2 front, we have companies like EY as an example, Big Four accounting firm. So that's Covalent. Fidelity is another example of an institutional player. So they dabble in both the Web2 and Web3. I believe they have 20 million customers in the US. So they're pretty large. And then they have a whole crypto business, which they're like thousands of people working on various kinds of crypto products. I'm pretty sure the ETF is part of that department as well. So there's a bunch of action going on there. In the previous cycle, we had all these NFT studios coming to play with our data. So we had like Warner Brothers, they released a Batman NFT collection. So they're trying to monetize, understand the holders and so on. There was this agency that did the Nike airdrop. The Knicks, they got almost $20 million in terms of collections. So that was like pretty solid. So we wrote a whole case study on them. This cycle, I think what we're starting to see are games which are top tier AAA games using blockchain as a backend. So an example there would be someone like Godzilla, which is just watching crypto on the backend. But right now I believe it's on the Steam marketplace, and soon on Xbox and other kinds of platforms. But that's a blockchain game. But if you were to play the game, you wouldn't understand. You wouldn't think it's a crypto game because you're not gonna have a MetaMask pop up and so on, right? So that's an example of the experience that I'm really excited for. So a lot of the data analytics, the data pipelines in the back end there is Covalent. So yeah, I think we're a horizontal platforms. You see use cases in finance, in gaming, in NFTs, in accounting, in ERP, in taxes, wallets. Just spread the gamut there of use cases.
Amazing kind of wide swath of use cases and verticals. Actually really excited to hear you talk about AAA gaming studios, bringing in blockchain into the back end of their tech stack. I was wondering when this was going to happen, because if you go back 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of gamers had animosity towards cryptocurrency networks and NFTs because of their perception of proof of work networks and how harmful it may or may not be to the environment. So it's kind of like a really cool use case for you to mention. So while we're talking about like a wide swath of Web2 and Web3 types of use cases, Covalent also, as you mentioned earlier, has replicated over 200 blockchains. So what does this look like? Because there's one hand where you can just kind of leverage EVM chains and somewhat copy and paste and maybe tweak the parameters for the difference of the networks. But then there's entirely different tech stacks like MoveVM, as you were mentioning, or even the whole Cosmos ecosystem. So at this point, when you and your team are onboarding support for a new blockchain network to integrate into the Covalent kind of overarching data service provider, what does that look like for you guys? How do you determine which new blockchain network to implement and onboard? What's the process like for onboarding an EVM chain versus a brand new architecture? Just would love to hear you mind dump that whole process of onboarding a new network.
Absolutely. So it comes down for us not as a single transaction, because we're building an ecosystem. So it comes down to the flywheel that they're trying to spin. So the flywheel is more blockchains leads to more data, leads to more developers, more use cases, and more data and more blockchain. So that's a flywheel there, which means that if a blockchain has no users, has no traction, it doesn't matter how much money you're willing to pay us, we would never index that blockchain. So there have been examples of blockchains that have come to us and have offered 7-figure grants. But if there are no users, there are no developers, no one's building on those chains, we could get the money, but it doesn't serve our purpose in spinning this flywheel faster. So that's an example of where there's a mismatch in expectations. And a lot of the times, the ecosystem heads on the other side, they have a checklist. So when you launch a chain, there's a checklist of infrastructure providers you have to go through, right? You need a stable coin, you need an Oracle, you need a bridge, you need an indexer, you need a block explorer, you need a, some kind of liquidity management tool, right? So there's a checklist, and Covalent is one of those items on the checklist. And they, usually knock on our doors and say, hey, we need Covalent support. We have this budget. Are you willing to go? And on our side, we have so much inbound demand in terms of new chains that we see, okay, do you have any application? Is anyone building on here? Do you have some kind of differentiated view on the world? Is it just another, undifferentiated EVM chain? Because there are like hundreds of these, right? Because if you go to a roll-up as a service provider, it's like a few $1,000, and you can spit up a chain with a token, right? That doesn't mean much. So those are the kinds of questions that we ask. Another key question that we ask is that whether it's EVM or non-EVM, and non-EVM chains are significantly harder to index compared to EVM chains. So I would say it's a lucky bet in the sense that we started in the EVM world with Ethereum, and EVM happens to have won out today. It's the majority of the deployments out there. But if you look at a non-EVM chain, SVM is an example, as an exception. SVM, like the Solana VM, is maybe one other ecosystem that has reached escape velocity and is here to stay. But if you look at like the near contracts, if you look at something exotic like Elrond, I think they even rebranded, or Cardano, which is a UTXO blockchain, or Ripple, or Stellar. There's not a lot of action on there besides payments. Just to be frank, the market cap tells a different story, right? You definitely don't want to take a longer short position on these chains based on traction, because these prices are disconnected from actual utility on the back end. But If you actually look at who's building, what the TVL are, what are the top apps, are these apps funded companies, are VCs playing in that industry? Usually the answer is no, not really. And it's a very sobering thought. So in our case, if there's no traction, if there are no developers, if there's an undifferentiated view on the world, we generally don't engage with those kinds of projects.
I want to take a sidestep real quick because you brought up something that's really interesting, and you've been building in blockchain since 2017. You've probably been paying attention a little bit longer. When I first got in was mid 2017, and back then you could say X chain is partnering with Y country, and the token price would pump like 40% out of nowhere. There was not really any utility to these underlying networks, and price was hyper speculative. In the years that you've been building here, have you seen more of a direction towards a marriage between underlying utility of a chain and the market cap for that chain? Or are we still in kind of this speculative separation where there isn't necessarily a value placed on utility like we might see with a stock that has an underlying company and a price to earnings ratio? Are we getting any closer to having some semblance of like a real metric that actually marries the two to one another?
I think you know the answer here. And the answer, unfortunately, is no. And if you look at the top 10 tokens by market cap, there's a lot of garbage on there, right? I can't wait for the day where, these Cardanos and so on just fall off that top 15, top 20. And it's a bit surprising. I think Polygon just dropped off the top 30. And Polygon, one of the hottest apps today, which is is Poly Market, which is the betting on elections and so on, is on Polygon. And Polygon dropping off the top 30 just means that it's not catering to the right audience in terms of like valuations and so on. In the general stock market, what happens is that you're ranked based on profitability and free cash flow and these really concrete metrics that have been refined over decades. And this is why you have a lot of churn with the companies on the stock market. Like Apple was on the brink of bankruptcy when Steve Jobs came back, I would say late 90s, it was in 97 or 98, and Microsoft had to bail Apple out. They were I think 100 days from going out of business. And now Apple is the first $1 trillion company. So the churn on these in the stock market is pretty brutal because it's pure numbers. Now, there might be exceptions like Tesla and so on, which has a very different trajectory, disconnected from what's happening on the ground. But generally, it's well understood on how to value these companies. But if you look at how you value these blockchain networks, there's no framework, right? If you look at the gas fee or you look at the burn mechanism, and then you back it down to a discounted cash flow, and then you value these networks, obviously those valuations are out of whack. So are we trending in the right direction? I think there's generally more awareness with participants on predatory tokenomics and low float, high FTV, down only kind of tokenomics. There's general awareness. But look at what's happening with the meme coins, right? So it's mostly an insider's game. It's super predatory. It's like people don't disclose who the holders are. They call it fair, but it's not really fair because all of this it's just that on chains like Solana, you don't have the visibility into the data as much as like Ethereum. So you can't really get these, there's not a lot of transparency around this. So it's unfortunate that, the frontiers of crypto continue to attract the get rich quick schemes. But I'm optimistic. I mean, there's definitely dashboards like Token Terminal that rank based on active users and revenue mechanisms and so on. And at some point, the music stops and you have to, live by a benchmark. So I can't wait for that day because I think projects like Covalent will get re-rated. But but not financial advice.
Thanks Thanks for sidestepping into the market a little bit and sharing your insights. And I agree. And oftentimes when things go either parabolically upward or downward when it comes to token prices, one of the ways that I really get grounded is by coming back into the technology and speaking with builders such as yourself, and really kind of why we stick through this during the parabolic upward moments that we hate with meme coins, and in the parabolic downward moments that we hate with our bags getting heavier. But ultimately, I think it's kind of the opportunity that this technology offers that really keeps us here and keeps people here for multi-year cycles. So I kind of want to loop back into a really cool kind of technological discussion and hear your inputs into how that Covalent is helping to make Ethereum and EVM land a more resilient place that can stand the test of times of maybe regulatory ambiguity, maybe negative legislation, maybe just diminished market participation. And so I want to pick your brain a little bit on the Ethereum Wayback Machine and just kind of hear a little bit about the power that light clients offer in terms of making a network more robust and more resilient. For instance, if I were to want to run a full Ethereum node, I would have to go and do a lot of learning right now. And I'm just, a quote unquote simple retail user who might know a little bit more, but not enough to be dangerous. So yeah, I just kind of want to hear what Covalent is building with Ethereum Wayback Machine and your perspective on how that increased the resiliency of the broader Ethereum ecosystem.
Great. So it's a great question. I think it's more philosophical rather than technical. I think there are different opinions, and I think, we believe the world should be one way while other people believe another way. And that's great. You have lots of solutions out there. So fundamentally, it comes down to this, right? So Ethereum right now is in a very challenging spot. And the reason for that is that it's going after two ideals. It's competing with Bitcoin as a store of value. And this is where the ultrasound money narrative comes in. That's where the fee burn mechanism comes in. That's where the inflationary, deflationary mechanics come in. And every time, especially after the L2s have come in, and that's where the whole discussion with the parasitic nature comes in, because the fee burn is not as much. So it's gone back to being an inflationary token. That's ETH, the currency itself. So it's competing with Bitcoin as a store of value, as this digital gold, as something that you can hold on to. And on the other hand, it's competing with Solana as an application platform, which is the world computer. It's the app store for all these decentralized applications. And Solana has never claimed to be a store of value. It's very clear in its North Star metric, and it's building the developer's platform. So Ethereum, by trying to compete with these two different ideals, which at times are opposing and conflicting, it's actually failing at both worlds. And there is a Chinese proverb that chase two rabbits and you catch none. So that's exactly what's happening here. And so what has happened is that there's a lot of infighting on whether the roadmap for Ethereum is the right approach. And this is where I said previously that the ETH holders, the ETH bag holders, are holding the roadmap hostage. And so in our opinion, the right approach for Ethereum is to go down and be the best-in-class developer platform, right? And not really focus on the store of value and things of that nature. Like it doesn't really matter. And in many ways, the reason I'm in this space is because of the opportunities that Ethereum provides as an application platform, as a developer's platform. There's limitless potential to build decentralized, unstoppable applications. So that's where I think Ethereum should focus. Now, when it comes down to building an application platform, going back to that better, faster, cheaper, what developers want is a super cheap blockchain, super fast blockchain, and it's just better in terms of the ecosystem. So Ethereum has won the ecosystem play, right? Majority of the ecosystem participants are on the EVM. It doesn't matter if it's like a bridge or a RPC or an indexer like Covalent. It's all EVM. So EVM is the number one. So they've won that game. Now, when it comes to better and faster, this is where you have a philosophical argument. So one way to make your blockchain faster is by making it what is known as a data center chain, which means you limit your node operators to a few select participants who have access to data center style gear. So dedicated hardware, dedicated DevOps people. So if you look at the newer blockchains like Solana, Monad, Say, these are data center chains, which means, they don't have a lot of distribution in terms of the number of nodes. It's very expensive to run these nodes. You need specialized gear, you need specialized know-how on how to scale these nodes and so on. It's not really a retail play. It's not meant for hobbyist operators at home. Now, Ethereum is directly in conflict with that. That's where it started out. It started out by empowering the solo stakers, the home stakers. It's actually very easy for you to run an ETH node at home, not a full archive node, but just participate in running a solo staker. So that ideal is now being challenged on whether these solo stakers are important for the next leg of the journey. And so what Ethereum is trying to do, there's definitely a battle where they're trying to chuck out some of the technical choices that have been made to enable these solo stakers. So my fear is Ethereum is going to become a data center chain, and it's going to become like one of these other blockchains like Solana and Monad and so on. Now, the challenge with the data center chain, to reach this hyperscale, one of the things they have to do is discard historical data. So if you run a Bitcoin node, for example, you can trace every single transaction from the Genesis block, from Satoshi's singular block from day one, right? Everything is traceable. So anyone can basically replicate the entire blockchain and bring it to the head of the blockchain without having to go outside what the node provides you. On Ethereum, that is definitely possible. But the set of changes that are happening, that are coming down the pipe, some of it that has already shipped, is making that impossible. So an example is the blobs. So Dekun released the blob architecture. This happened a few months ago. It was a hard fork. It was a pretty major upgrade. So historically, what has been happening is all of these rollups use a data structure known as call data to put their transaction data. And this is how, ZK Sync, Scroll, Arbitrum, Optimism, that's basically what they were doing. Now, the challenge is the call data is data availability on chain. It's a premium. And so when all of these rollups start dumping onto the L1, the cost of writing to the L1 goes through the roof, and that cost is passed down to the L2 users. So even though these L2s were faster, in theory, the fee structure was still expensive because they all had to settle on the L1. So with the Dekun upgrade, they introduced this new data structure called a blob, where they could write to the blob, and that's a different fee market. So you're not competing with applications in the L1. And that substantially decreased the gas fees. So if you look at the average gas fees over the last couple of weeks, it's been like 1 GUI and at times actually sub 1 GUI, right? So it's been really cheap to use, which is fantastic. But the trade-off here is that Ethereum deletes that blob after 4,000 epochs or 18 days, which means you don't have access to this historical transaction data. So it's shedding some crucial information in order to reach faster throughputs. And that's fine, right? That's okay. So blockchains are not databases. Blockchains are more like billboards where you post your transaction data, wait for some kind of challenge, and that's it. After the challenge window, you don't need that transaction data anymore because the blockchain has propagated. So blockchains are more like billboards. So you don't really need the historical data. So this is where the Ethereum Wayback Machine comes in. It's almost like you can think of it as an ally. So it goes back to this modular architecture where it doesn't matter if you outsource your execution to Move VM or SVM, or you move your DA to Celestia or EigenDA or any of the DA players. By the way, this deleting transaction data is common across the board. So Celestia, EigenDA, they all delete the data, right? That's how they're able to reach hyperscale. And that's a common feature. So about a year and a half ago, Sriram, one of the founders of EigenLayer, I was chatting with him about, the space and where EigenDA and so on, restaking and so on. I'm not super on top of things in the restaking world. There's a lot of financial and economic stuff, which is outside my area of expertise. But on the data availability, he crafted this thing talking about short-term DA and long-term DA. So short-term DA is meant for the challenge window. It's for transaction data and for the blockchain to propagate. And long-term DA, which has a different security model, is required for to to preserve the history of the blockchain. And so this is where we introduced the Ethereum Wayback Machine. We wrote this white paper about a year ago. And, the reception has been incredible from people in this space. And we released the testnet about 2 weeks ago. And about 4,000 people have signed up for the testnet to run these light clients. So you can run these light clients on your phone, on your laptop. You don't need to run a full archive node. You don't need any of the heavy duty gear. And it continues to keep Ethereum itself secure. So while Ethereum itself sheds the historical data with the data availability sampling and all the techniques that we use in the light client, you still are able to rebuild the entire state of Ethereum. So you've preserved what has made Ethereum special, even though, it's been re-architectured for this new world of faster throughput and, faster high bandwidth blockchains.
Wow, fantastic description. Coming from, I kind of had like a surface level understanding of what the Ethereum Wayback Machine was seeking to offer. And the description you just gave made me wholly understand why it's an integral part of maintaining the record and history of what is happening on the Ethereum chain. So yeah, you nailed it. That was incredible. We're kind of like wrapping up or coming to near the end of our time. So maybe we can end the conversation then and zoom out and maybe hear from you where you think we're going to be in the next few years, or maybe I'll even just open it up in general. You say that you're essentially just an optimist. So maybe give us like a reason or a couple reasons for hope on why you're so optimistic about what the overarching opportunity that these technologies offer us and how they're going to improve and benefit the lives of humankind.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great way to wrap up. So I think it goes back to this better, faster, cheaper. And there are multiple people in the industry who don't look at like CoinGecko prices. They don't look at, what Bitcoin's price is, and they continue to grind day in and day out, better, faster, and cheaper. So when it comes to blockchains are going to be substantially faster. They're going to have a change in the security model from crypto economic to like ZKPs, which are zero knowledge proofs. They're undefeatable, unbreakable. I think the crypto adoption question is a bipartisan issue. So perhaps, the Dems are a little, maybe it's like delay the adoption of crypto by a few months. That's where my conviction is. But I think at this stage, crypto is unstoppable. There's just way too much going on in the adoption sense. And you have players like Coinbase that are pushing hard. Just yesterday, the base TVL flipped Arbitrum's TVL, right? So clearly, there's real traction, real adoption. All of the stuff with the meme coins, I think will die out like very fast. And if you look at what's happening with projects like Covalent, projects like Filecoin, projects like all the DeepIn projects, it's incredible like how, there's real adoption, real traction. And if you were to paint an analogy with where the internet was in late 90s, you had this hype cycle which completely burst with the internet bubble. But by 2004, that's when Google went public. That's when Facebook was founded. Then you had Twitter. Then you had all the other social media plays. Then you had Instagram, and you had all these. You had Airbnb, all these internet native companies and products and services. I think that's the same thing that's going to happen. Most of what we see on blockchains today are more like internet-like, digital-like products being moved on chain, and so we'll have genuinely crypto native payments and crypto native use cases in the next couple of years. I'm more bullish. I think the next 5 years is going to be more exciting than the last 5. And just see how far we've come in the last 5 years, right? Stable coins, ERC20 tokens, rollups, ZKP, alt VMs, alt DAs. Every question has been answered and re-answered, and there's been no leaf that's been overturned. So I'm very, very excited, very bullish on the space. And I think you just have to zoom out a bit and not look at the Bitcoin prices on a daily basis. So if you look at the big picture, I think, things are trending in the right direction. I would in fact say things are actually accelerating, which is very exciting.
I would say the longer you're here, the easier it is to not look at the day-to-day price of Bitcoin. Ganesh, fantastic way to end this interview, this conversation. Looking forward, who do you want to talk to, and what's the best way they can reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can talk to me on X. My Twitter handle is GANESH. E5H. We'll probably have it in the show notes. Follow Covalent underscore HQ for our main decentralized protocol, and stay abreast of everything that's coming down the pipe. We have a mainnet potentially, depending on audits, end of the year around DEF CON. So very, very excited for everything that's happening in the ecosystem today.
Well, I'm wishing you a good luck with your mainnet launch and around your proposed timeline. That would be fantastic to see at DevCon. And with that, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It was a phenomenal conversation.
Dylan, thank you so much for this opportunity. Looking forward to the next steps. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Smart Economy podcast. To stay in the loop with our latest episodes and insights, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for all your favorite content. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please show your support by liking, commenting, and reviewing this episode on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and brings even better content your way. So we would love to hear from you. Drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube to share what topics you'd like us to cover or who you'd like to see as our next guest. And if you or someone you know would make a great guest, feel free to reach out. We are always looking for fresh voices and new perspectives. And if you're a NEO token holder, please consider voting for NEO News today as your council representative. We've proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. With all that said, thank you so much for listening, and we can't wait to catch you next time.